Jobeky is a small electronic drum company in the UK that have been producing electronic drums, triggers and even electronic cymbals for a long time now. I've got one of their 3-spoke dual zone centre mount triggers for a 12-inch drum, so today I'm going to show you how it performs. I'm Luke, this is the eDrum Workshop, and full disclosure, this trigger was sent to me free of charge by Jobeky at the same time that they sent me some of their 3-ply mesh heads. I can keep the trigger, but I wasn't asked to make this video or to say anything in particular. It was just for me to try out, and I decided that I wanted to share my experience with the trigger. The trigger itself came in a very simple box with a set of instructions, a drumstick lolly and a little drumstick pen. All things that I enjoy, so we're off to a good start. First impressions taking it out of the box, I thought that the build quality looked good. It's a well put together metal trigger with 3 flexible spokes designed to fit into a 6-lug 12-inch drum with the provided L brackets and screws. The trigger platform has adjustable screws on it, and the trigger cone is more of a foam cylinder in the centre. The foam itself is pretty firm and it holds its shape for quite a while after it's been depressed. It also comes with a rim piezo with a quick connector for hooking it up to the main trigger unit. This just has double-sided tape on it and it's intended to be stuck directly onto the shell of the drum. The trigger also came with 2 different jack connectors, a barrel jack that can be mounted into the shell from the vent hole or a drilled hole, and an external jack socket that attaches to a tension rod. Both of these jacks connect up to the main trigger unit using a mini jack cable, and if you're using the external jack socket it will fit through the vent hole. I'm not 100% clear on whether they both normally come with a trigger or whether you're asked which one you want when you place an order, but I'm sure that you could specify which one you want if you've got a preference. I also like the use of the mini jack connections here. I think it's a really user-friendly way to go about it, and it makes things really easy to disconnect and reconnect. Fitting the trigger into the drum was a really simple affair. I started off with the jack because I've already got a drilled hole in the drum and I like the clean look of barrel jacks. Then I went on to fit the trigger itself. You just remove 3 lug screws in a triangle formation, attach the L brackets to the lug screws and then screw the trigger spokes onto the L brackets. I actually fitted the screws on the spokes the wrong way around at first because I was being hasty, but that was just simple user error, and if I'd have looked at the instructions then they would have guided me in the right direction. I stuck the rim piezo to the shell on the side of the drum closest to me so that it was underneath where I would hit the most. With the trigger in place, I put the heads back on the drum and I was good to go. The good news is that the trigger itself is really sensitive. Whether it was hooked up to a Roland module, the Pearl Mimic Pro or the eDrum in 10, I could pick up really soft hits very easily with this trigger. The sensitivity of the rim is also really good. Some slight tweaks to the rim gain or the head rim balance might be necessary depending on the module that you're using, but as long as you've got access to at least some basic rim settings, you should be able to dial it in reasonably easily. For example, I had to boost the rim gain a little bit on Roland modules, and I actually reduced it on the Mimic Pro when using a Roland preset. Unfortunately, the bad side of this sensitivity is that the trigger is actually very hot overall. Hitting directly in the centre and just off centre gives a pretty hefty spike in velocity, the dreaded hotspot, and that actually extends a bit wider than just the centre of the drum to an area of around this size. It's also a bit too hot to reliably dial back for accurate top-end dynamics. When testing on my TD50X using a centre trigger preset, if I went below a sensitivity of 2, the next step down is 1.5, the trigger was still really hot in the middle, but it wouldn't go above a velocity value of of 117. That's where it would then max out, and that makes it sound like the problem is solved and that you'd be able to increase the sensitivity. But in reality, it still spikes up to that exact velocity on a medium strength hit. Decreasing the sensitivity wasn't actually giving me any extra headroom in order to be able to hit harder. Now, I'm not an expert on trigger signals, but my thinking is that on a Roland module at least, the trigger might be outputting so hot that you're kind of losing the very top of the peak information entirely, if that makes sense. So when I bring down the sensitivity, all it's doing is bringing down this already clipped signal. When testing on the eDrum in 10, setting the gain to the minimum value of 1 and watching the waveform monitor, the waveform goes off the top of the monitor, as you can see, showing that the signal is clipping on that too. There might be some modules that can take this signal as is and give you the full range of dynamics, but on my Roland modules and the eDrum in 10 at least, I couldn't get that center signal low enough to be 100% reliable. On the Pearl Mimic Pro, the gain settings and the capture top velocity settings did help a little bit, but it still spikes up to the higher end of the dynamic range a bit too quickly. Unfortunately, this really limits the dynamic range as far as my own playing style goes, especially for snare work. Using different trigger curves did help to some degree. The log 1 and log 2 curves on the Roland TD50X helped a little bit to bring the outer head dynamics up a bit, and on the eDrum in and the Mimic, the ability to heavily customize the trigger curve helped even more, but it's never really truly solving the problem because it's not bringing down the hotspot enough. The hotspot suppression on the eDrum in was the best at making things feel a bit more natural, but it still doesn't fully fix it. And this is a real shame because otherwise the triggering is really good. The rim response is good overall. The only issue that I ran into with the rim triggering was that on a Roland module using positional sensing, sometimes I was unintentionally getting a rim shot rather than just a rim click. Playing around with the head rim adjustments could help a bit, but I could never quite fully dial it out. However, if your module doesn't support positional sensing on the rims, then this won't be an issue for you at all. Rim separation and response on the Mimic, for example, was really good. And if you were using a Roland module with positional sensing, you could always turn that off on the rims to get a more consistent single sound. The positional sensing on the head tracks quite well on a Roland module, but it was a little bit too center focused. It doesn't really start going towards the edge articulations until you get about 2/3 of the way across the head. I have a feeling that that might be because of how hot that center signal is. It's still pretty usable in a playing scenario though. When I was using this on the eDrum in, there's more control over where the edge articulations begin and end, so I could get much more consistent results with that and Superior Drummer 2. All of this general head and rim response is pretty consistent across all of the modules that I've tried it with. It's a playable trigger that hasn't done anything awful like missed any ghost notes or given me any headaches with double triggering or anything game breaking like that. It's just a little bit too sensitive for a wide dynamic range. I personally think that this trigger is better suited to being used as a tom pad, at least for my playing style. When trying to use it as a snare pad, I couldn't get the finely tuned response out of it that I wanted. However, if you're a player that usually sets up your triggers to hit the top end of the dynamic range with a lighter or more medium stroke, then this might suit your playing style just fine. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that this is a bad trigger. I've been spoiled a little bit by pad pads like the Roland digital snare, and I would never expect a trigger in this price range to perform that well. These triggers sell for around £58 for this 12-inch one, with the 10-inch one coming in at £55 and the 13-inch at £59. That's the equivalent of $76 to $84 or 65 to 70 euros across the entire range at the current exchange rate. And I think that what you get for that price is good value, especially with how well built the trigger is. I do think that the bulk of my complaints could be solved by cooling down that trigger signal just a little bit. If the signal can be reduced just enough to allow for better top-end dynamics without losing any low dynamic information, then I think that these triggers would be bang on for what they are. And really, I have been pretty nitpicky here because this trigger gets a lot right and it will probably fit the bill for a lot of people. It might just not be the perfect trigger for everyone. I do have other electronic drum gear reviews on this channel like this one. Go check it out if you're interested. If you want new samples or kits for your electronic drum module, don't forget to check out my store at thedrumworkshop.com. I've got kits for Roland modules, the Pearl Mimic Pro, and sample packs that are compatible with other modules too. And above all, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!